Beneath the ruins of old wars lie more than bones and steel. There are echoes, stray fragments of signals, whispers through dust, coordinates that never should have been written down. Some say history ended with victory parades and treaties, but in the quiet between what was recorded and what was erased, something else survived. Not soldiers or nations, but ideas, mechanisms designed to listen, to learn, to endure long after their makers were gone. These fragments are all that remain of vanished convoys, sealed vaults, and men whose names were erased before they were born. Their trails run cold in abandoned tunnels, locked archives, and files stamped never to be opened. But if you follow the static closely enough, you begin to hear a pulse beneath it, a rhythm that doesn't belong to any machine or man, as if the war itself never stopped, only went silent, waiting for someone to start listening again. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Convoy of Operation Winterglass. The winter of 1944 marked one of the most perilous periods for Arctic convoys. The Allies had been moving critical war materials through the North Atlantic, under constant threat from U-boats and Luftwaffe reconnaissance. Operation Winterglass was launched on December 11, 1944, as a high-priority transfer of 6 cargo vessels under Royal Navy escort, routed from Murmansk to Scapa Flow. Official records list the convoy as PQ-99, though later cross-references in declassified Admiralty communications reveal the designation Winterglass in restricted codebooks. What was officially described as a standard material shipment was, in truth, something else entirely. Each ship's manifest had been scrubbed from the registry, its cargo listed as classified per Combined Intelligence Committee Order 6A-73. Surviving fragments of intercepted German communications hinted the Axis were aware of the convoy's existence, though not its purpose. Naval intelligence referred to the operation as a transfer of high-value technical artifacts, believed to be salvaged from captured German research sites along the Baltic coast. By December 17th, the convoy was last seen entering the Barents Sea under worsening conditions. Reports from the HMS Torrington, the escort destroyer leading the formation, described radio interference of artificial origin disrupting their communications shortly before all contact was lost. For 2 weeks, British and Norwegian aircraft searched the Arctic routes but found no trace. The official explanation cited catastrophic weather events and U-boat activity, and the file was closed. But in 1951, an internal MI6 memo surfaced within the Winterglass archive, discovered in a mislabeled Ministry of Defence folder. The document, authored by a Commander L.H. Fenwick, stated that one vessel, the Mersey's Wake, made port near Jan Mayen Island, partially intact but abandoned. Crew missing. Cargo holds sealed from within. The ship was recovered by a joint Norwegian-British crew on January 2, 1945. When boarding parties entered the vessel, they found the interior coated in frost despite a functioning boiler system. Logs and navigation charts were shredded and scattered through the bridge, and every cabin door had been barricaded from the inside. The ship's galley appeared to have been in use only hours before abandonment. One entry in the engineering log, dated December 18th, read simply, "Engines running on reserve, northern light too low. Do not open lower hold." No mention was made of what was stored below. A classified Royal Navy recovery report, declassified in 1987, described the lower cargo bay as containing a sealed iron chamber, approximately 6 meters in length. Secured with naval welds inconsistent with British fabrication, the chamber emitted faint heat signatures despite the sub-zero conditions. When naval technicians attempted to breach the chamber, they found its interior empty, save for 2 sealed canisters labelled in German. Agentum des RLM, nicht öffnen. Property of the Reich Air Ministry. Do not open. Both canisters were shipped to Fort Halstead in Kent for analysis. What happened next was quietly erased from all official records. In February 1945, a memorandum from the Directorate of Scientific Intelligence, DSI 14-27B, referenced a classified object recovered from Arctic operations, assigned to Dr. Ernest Beale, an aeronautical engineer formerly of the Royal Aircraft Establishment. Beale's lab notes, preserved by his family after his death in 1952, mention testing an unidentified turbine core derived from German propulsion research. His last entry, dated March 3, 1945, reads, "The internal temperature gradient increases with proximity to ferromagnetic materials, suggestive of field induction beyond conventional principles." Within days, Beale's lab was dismantled, and all materials were shipped to RAF Boscombe Down under the label Winterglass Do Not Release. Over the years, the story of Operation Winterglass slipped into obscurity. Official convoy logs omit any reference beyond PQ-99's disappearance, and post-war analyses of Arctic operations make no mention of the event. Yet fragments persist. In 1978, a retired radio operator named Harold Kearns gave a statement to a BBC researcher, claiming he intercepted a distress call on December 19, 1944, while stationed at the Wick monitoring station in Scotland. The message, transmitted on a restricted frequency, repeated a single phrase: "The sea is burning beneath us." Kearns' report was dismissed as atmospheric interference, though recordings later recovered from archive storage confirmed his signal logs matched frequencies allocated to Convoy PQ-99. In 1991, Russian naval archives in Murmansk released captured German U-boat dispatches from the final months of the war. Among them was a report from U-382, which claimed to have cited an Allied vessel emitting unnatural auroral phenomena north of Bear Island. The U-boat's commander, Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Albrecht, described a halo of blue light rising from the waves before the vessel disappeared from sonar. The log ended abruptly 2 days before U-382 itself was lost, presumably due to mechanical failure. The remaining puzzle pieces of Winterglass surfaced in 2003, when a diver expedition in the Norwegian Arctic discovered metallic debris consistent with WWII cargo hull plating. One diver's camera captured a fragment of stenciled lettering on the wreck. WAC 3-4, cross-referenced with Allied shipping lists. The fragment corresponded precisely to Mercy's wake. However, sonar imaging revealed that the ship's stern section had been deliberately detached, suggesting a controlled separation. Further investigation was prohibited when the Norwegian government declared the site a restricted ecological zone due to unexploded ordnance. For historians, the mystery of Operation Winterglass lies not only in the vanishing convoy, but in the nature of its mission. Every surviving reference points to an operation involving recovered German technology, possibly from research facilities in Königsberg or Peenemünde. The suggestion that elements of Nazi propulsion research were transported across the Arctic under Allied control is not without precedent. Operation Lusty and Paperclip both secured advanced aircraft and scientists for post-war use, but Winterglass differs in its secrecy. No scientist names, no debriefings, no trace of personnel. Some intelligence historians believe Winterglass represented an early attempt by the Allies to move captured experimental energy systems or weapon prototypes out of the European theatre before Soviet forces advanced. Others argue it was a cover for something more psychological, documents or data pertaining to human experimentation, or perhaps an early attempt to test electromagnetic propulsion. No conclusive evidence has ever been found. By the 1980s, the remaining files on Operation Winterglass were transferred to the Defense Intelligence Staff Archive at Hanslope Park, where they remain sealed under the National Security Exemption Act until at least 2080. 2009 parliamentary inquiry into missing wartime files confirmed the operations designation, but denied any knowledge of recovered artifacts. Today, the legend persists among naval historians and conspiracy researchers alike that somewhere beneath the Arctic ice lies one of the missing ships of Winterglass, perfectly preserved, its cargo still intact. The Mercy's wake is said to rest under 60 meters of ice, its hull sealed and engines inexplicably warm. No one has verified the claim, but in the classified corridors of naval intelligence, the file still carries a single annotation handwritten in the margin: "Do not recover." The cargo remains active. Chapter 2: Shadows Beneath the Nürnberg Vaults. When Allied forces entered Nürnberg in April 1945, the city was already in ruins. Bombing raids had reduced the Reich's former symbol of unity to a skeleton of stone and fire. The 3rd U.S. Army under General George S. Patton was ordered to secure strategic points: the SS barracks, the Zeppelin field, and the old Reichsbahn tunnels beneath the central district. On paper, these tunnels were standard transport routes for military logistics. But as American engineers began clearing debris, they stumbled upon sealed vaults buried beneath the substructure, chambers that did not appear on any municipal blueprint or Wehrmacht record. The initial discovery was logged as Site 12A, and the units involved, primarily elements of the 1269th Engineer Combat Battalion, were told to await further orders. Within 48 hours, the area was cordoned off by the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC. The first written mention of what lay below appeared in an internal US Army memorandum, dated April 23, 1945, titled Anomalous Storage Vaults, Nürnberg. It described reinforced concrete enclosures powered by an independent electrical system of German manufacture, unconnected to the local grid. Radiation counters, recently deployed due to fears of Nazi atomic experiments, spiked unusually high within certain chambers. Equipment appeared melted, though no fire damage was evident. A team led by Lieutenant Colonel Robert K. Hendricks was ordered to document the site. His report, later marked Eyes Only, Manhattan Liaison, claimed that the lower level housed scientific materials of an unfamiliar configuration, including metallic cylinders filled with viscous fluid, and machinery exhibiting signs of magnetic containment. Hendricks' men also discovered a lead-lined storage compartment filled with reels of 35mm film labeled Project Morgenlicht, Morning Light. Several reels were shipped to London for analysis. Only one frame survives, now held in the Imperial War Museum under restricted classification. A blurred image of concentric rings surrounding a central sphere, with technical annotations written in Gothic script. Handwriting analysis later identified the author as Dr. Erich Schumann, a physicist and former director of the Heereswaffenamt Research Division, the Army Weapons Office. Schumann's known work in acoustic weaponry and wave resonance. Weaponization had been halted in 1943, yet Morgenlicht suggested continued experimentation into oscillating field generators, capable of distorting electromagnetic communication. Witnesses from the initial excavation described the atmosphere below as suffocating, with a metallic taste in the air and an incessant low-frequency hum that persisted even after the power was cut. One engineer, Sergeant Louis Petrowski, later testified in a 1946 medical report that he experienced hallucinations of flickering light sources in peripheral vision while inside the chamber. His subsequent psychological evaluation was sealed. 2 days after Hendricks' report reached London, the entire excavation was ordered closed. The tunnels were sealed with controlled demolitions supervised by British Royal Engineers, ostensibly for safety. In September 1946, an MI5 brief titled Project Morning Light disposal summarized that materials incompatible with safe transportation were destroyed in situ under joint Anglo-American directive. The destruction order bore the signature of Brigadier John T. Ruggles, a liaison with Operation Alsos, which had been responsible for capturing German nuclear assets. However, discrepancies emerged years later. According to a Soviet GRU file declassified in 1992, a Red Army intelligence unit arrived in Nürnberg only 3 days after the demolition and detected residual power readings underground. Their report concluded that Western forces intentionally obscured recovery operations related to experimental energy systems. Testimonies from civilians who worked in the Reichsbahn tunnels before the war corroborate that certain areas had been restricted since 1943, guarded by SS scientists in grey lab uniforms. Workers spoke of glowing crates delivered at night and mechanical vibrations that caused nearby instruments to malfunction. The crates bore serial numbers beginning with RLM 94, consistent with Luftwaffe research equipment. One surviving manifest found in a destroyed administrative office lists Jarrett 84B, Frequenzkammer, or frequency chamber, classified as property of the Reich Air Ministry. In 1950, during post-war reconstruction, a local excavation accidentally exposed a portion of one of the sealed tunnels. Workers discovered melted steel fragments and scorched brickwork deep underground. US Army personnel immediately reclassified the area, citing unexploded ordnance hazards. Yet an internal memo from the Bavarian State Archive, dated 1952, references an anomalous metallic structure removed by American trucks during the night. No record of its transport destination exists. The Nürnberg vaults became a whispered legend among post-war intelligence officers. Rumors circulated that the materials recovered had been diverted to US and British black programs, possibly contributing to early radar interference technology or psychological warfare experiments. A 1957 Rand Corporation report mentions electromagnetic field modulation derived from confiscated German prototypes, citing unidentified sources within the Ministry of Supply. The terminology matches that of Morgenlicht's technical sketches. By 1963, all surviving members of Hendricks' team had either retired or died under obscure circumstances. Hendricks himself was killed in a car crash near Dover after reportedly contacting a journalist about unfinished wartime work. His wife later claimed he had been receiving anonymous phone calls instructing him to forget the tunnels. His personal effects were confiscated by the US Embassy in 1972. A West German geological survey recorded unexplained magnetic anomalies beneath the old rail depot near Frauentorgraben, the approximate location of the destroyed tunnels. The data revealed a concentrated electromagnetic field, roughly 40 meters below ground, fluctuating in rhythm with industrial power cycles above. When the survey team returned a week later, the readings had vanished entirely. Their equipment, however, malfunctioned permanently, showing unexplained burn marks near the wiring. To this day, the city's lower foundations remain off-limits to deep excavation. Officially, the reason is historical preservation and structural instability. Yet construction workers report that heavy machinery loses power when operating near the site, and underground sensors often register shortwave interference in the 30-40 kHz range. Some technicians claim that the signals resemble those used by early radar jammers, patterns first recorded in 1944. What truly lay beneath Nürnberg's ruins remains classified under NATO Record Set 2094 DE, marked protected by mutual agreement. The surviving notes of Dr. Schumann suggest that Morgenlicht was designed to create standing wave fields capable of distorting both sound and radio transmission, a primitive form of what modern engineers might call directed energy disruption. If the Allies indeed found such technology, it would explain the secrecy surrounding the vaults. Declassified fragments of Operation Alsos show that at least 3 other German cities contained similar sealed installations. Kassel, Breslau, and Linz. All were destroyed before Soviet occupation. Whether these sites shared the same function as Nürnberg's vaults remains speculation. The story closes with a haunting footnote found in Hendrik's original field notebook, retrieved from a private collection in 1998. Scrawled at the bottom of the final page, in smudged pencil, were the words, "They were building something that listens, even when no one speaks." Chapter 3. The Ghost Signals of Project Ashfield. In the summer of 1953, a wave of strange radio transmissions began sweeping across Europe. Amateur shortwave operators from Sweden to the Balkans reported identical coded tones, bursts of rhythmic signals repeating every 6 minutes, each transmission followed by a long pause and a faint mechanical hum. The British Broadcasting Monitoring Service logged the phenomenon as non-standard source, Eastern origin, though their analysts could not determine the signal's origin point. Within weeks, triangulation from military listening stations placed the coordinates near Gdansk, Poland, on the ruins of an abandoned Luftwaffe airfield destroyed in 1945. Under quiet directive from MI5 and the US Air Force Security Service, the case was designated Project Ashfield. On July 12th, a combined Anglo-American team departed from RAF Mildenhall for reconnaissance over the Baltic coast. Officially, they were meteorological surveyors. In reality, they were tasked with locating the signal's source and determining if Soviet forces had reactivated a wartime installation. Photographic intelligence from the overflight revealed remnants of concrete runways and hangars, half swallowed by vegetation. But near the center of the airfield stood a tower not listed in any pre-war maps, intact and seemingly operational. Ground teams were dispatched weeks later. According to the internal report filed by Major William A. Trowbridge, the site appeared to have been untouched since 1945. Entry was forced through a reinforced steel door engraved with the Luftwaffe's eagle insignia, still bearing traces of black paint. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the walls lined with obsolete electrical conduits. The power, inexplicably, was still live, fed by a series of underground generators that roared to life the moment breakers were engaged. Beneath the tower, engineers found a sealed bunker with racks of radio equipment connected to a central console marked Frequenzüberwachung, Gerät 1542. Every dial had been welded into position. The generator was estimated to have been running intermittently for years without maintenance. The team also recovered a logbook dated 1944 to 1945, signed by Oberfunker Hans Reiss. The final entry, dated April 22, 1945, read, "Primary channel locked. Awaiting signal return. No response from Berlin." After that, the logs ceased. The system itself continued to transmit. Analysis revealed that the tones emitted by the equipment corresponded to a modified version of an Allied cipher, specifically an early variant of the Type X code. Used by British intelligence, this anomaly baffled the cryptographers assigned to Ashfield. How could a Nazi-era device, abandoned in 1945, produce cipher patterns not officially created until years after the war? Some speculated Soviet reverse engineering or a deliberate deception, but no evidence supported either. When the bunker's lower chamber was excavated, investigators uncovered a second level, flooded but largely intact. Inside were reels of magnetic tape labeled Abhörprotokolle, Ashfield Linie, or listening protocols, Ashfield Line. The tapes contained hours of intercepted radio chatter from both Allied and Axis frequencies, many dated weeks after Germany's surrender. Experts confirmed the authenticity of the voices. Some belonged to real Allied officers presumed dead before May 1945, yet the timestamps were impossible. On September 2, 1953, a follow-up team from the Royal Signals Regiment attempted to dismantle the machinery. During removal, several men reported auditory hallucinations, hearing faint Morse code patterns through their helmets, despite no active radios being present. One technician, Sergeant Colin Drew, later described the sensation as the machine listening back. After the dismantling began, the original transmissions ceased entirely. Ashfield's equipment was shipped to RAF Croughton in England for analysis, then later to the US Signal Corps laboratories in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. In both facilities, technicians documented recurring malfunctions in nearby equipment whenever the devices were powered. Oscilloscope readings revealed subaudible waveforms, frequency modulations too low to be humanly perceived, yet still present within the broadcast spectrum. Within months, the entire project was sealed under NATO Communications Directive 8-22, labelled Anomalous Signal Retention Phenomenon. By 1955, Project Ashfield had disappeared from public record. Yet occasional references appeared in declassified communications between GCHQ and the NSA throughout the 1960s. One 1967 memo from Cheltenham cryptographers referred to legacy interference consistent with Ashfield pulse cycles. Another mentioned encoded test patterns of unknown, Allied origin continuing beyond expected termination period. No explanation followed. The mystery deepened when, in 1971, a Polish defector named Andrzej Kowalczyk claimed he had worked in a post-war Soviet facility near Kaliningrad, dedicated to studying Western Phantom transmissions. He described equipment identical to the Ashfield array, large valve-based transmitters connected to rotating magnetic drums. According to his account, the Soviets believed the signals originated from buried infrastructure left behind by German intelligence, possibly part of a network codenamed Spiegelfeld, mirror field. Kowalczyk's statements were dismissed at the time as Cold War propaganda, but internal CIA assessments acknowledged congruence with declassified Ashfield parameters. That same year, the Polish Ministry of Defense conducted its own inquiry into the old Gdansk airfield, now overgrown. The team recorded faint background noise in the 5 MHz band, identical in rhythm to the original 1953 tones. Equipment failure halted the investigation. The official report concluded the interference came from abandoned Soviet communications testing. However, in an appendix added decades later, one technician handwrote a chilling note: frequency stable, no variation for 18 years. In 1989, when the Iron Curtain fell, British researchers obtained partial access to Soviet intelligence archives in Moscow. Among the microfilms was a set of intercepted Western messages from 1954 labelled Ghost Frequency, Origin Unknown. The Soviets had apparently detected the same transmissions for nearly a decade, recording them on magnetic tape and comparing them to known Allied encryption cycles. Their conclusion was that the signals represented recorded Allied communications reflected via atmospheric echo with temporal distortion. In simpler terms, they believed the transmissions were time-delayed reflections from the upper atmosphere, yet no known natural phenomenon could produce such a precise and repeated signal. One file, however, remains especially disturbing. It contained transcripts of a decoded message fragment from February 1953, allegedly from the Gdansk frequency. The message was brief, field active, requesting confirmation of receipt. This is Ashfield Command, Sector North. Hold for reply. According to records, no Allied entity ever used the designation Ashfield Command. Today, Remnants of the site still exist beneath the forest that covers the old airfield. In 2002, Polish historians conducted a limited excavation and unearthed fragments of copper cabling and corroded transmitter components matching WWII German design. Soil analysis revealed traces of fuel oil consistent with early generator lubricants, though no sign of the deeper bunker was found. The surrounding trees, however, exhibited unusual growth patterns, twisted trunks that leaned in the same direction, as if pulled by an unseen force. Declassified NATO intelligence in 2015 finally acknowledged that Project Ashfield had been an unresolved post-war investigation into anomalous electromagnetic transmissions. The final line of the report, redacted except for a few words, reads, "Residual activity may persist within subbands 523 to 531 MHz. Interference unexplained. Site reburied. Do not reactivate equipment." And yet, across Europe, amateur radio enthusiasts continue to report a faint pulsing signal on those same frequencies every December, the anniversary of the Convoy's first detection. Its pattern remains unchanged since 1953. When decoded using standard Allied ciphers, it spells a single repeated phrase: "We are still receiving." Chapter 4. Operation Black Meridian Disavowed. In February 1947, 2 years after the official end of World War II, a joint Anglo-American intelligence task force was quietly established under the codename Black Meridian. The stated objective, according to the minimal paperwork that survived, was to locate and retrieve missing German scientists who had vanished from Allied custody following the collapse of the Third Reich. But internal memoranda reveal that the mission's true scope was far broader. Rather than mere repatriation, Black Meridian was charged with investigating rumors of clandestine laboratories hidden deep within the Carpathian Mountains, installations allegedly operating beyond both Soviet and Allied. Oversight: the first team, assembled at Tempelhof Airfield in Berlin under the supervision of Colonel Edward R. Lansing of the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps, CIC. The roster included engineers, linguists, and medical officers. Among them, Captain Harold P. Cates, an expert in biological warfare research formerly attached to Fort Detrick. Their orders were signed by Major General Leslie Groves, the same man who had overseen the Manhattan Project. Though his name was later struck from official copies, the mission was never publicly acknowledged. On March 11, 1947, Black Meridian crossed into Czechoslovakia disguised as a humanitarian medical convoy. Using Czech liaison officers, they traveled southeast toward the Romanian frontier, following faint intelligence trails that pointed to the Maramuresh region, an area notorious for wartime German fortifications. Local villagers spoke of convoys passing through the mountains long after Germany's surrender, carrying machines that burned without fire. They claimed the cargoes bore the sigil of a black sun within a circle, identical to emblems later associated with the SS Ahnenerbe Research Division. The task force established a forward camp near the village of Vyšeho de Sus. According to a partially declassified field journal recovered in 1979, their first discovery came within a week, a hidden tunnel system concealed behind a collapsed mineshaft. Inside, they found crates stamped Zündkern, Eigentum des Reiches, ignition core, property of the Reich. The contents were meticulously wrapped in lead sheeting, and beneath the crates lay a series of bodies, uniformed personnel, unidentifiable due to chemical burns. The cause of death was recorded as acute cellular degradation consistent with exposure to high-frequency emissions. Further, exploration revealed an underground complex extending more than half a mile into the mountainside. There were generators still operational, fueled by what engineers described as synthetic compounds of unknown composition. Murals painted on the corridor walls displayed technical diagrams mixed with occult symbols, an unsettling fusion of science and mysticism. In one chamber, a large cylindrical structure was found bolted into a reinforced pit, labeled only Subject Helios. Wires from the machine connected to dozens of desiccated corpses arranged in a circle, each wearing Luftwaffe uniforms stripped of insignia. A lab notebook, written in fractured German English, listed experiments involving photoelectrical amplification of neural discharge. The surviving members of the first entry team sealed the site within 48 hours and transmitted coded coordinates to London. Within days, a second team arrived from Frankfurt, accompanied by American OSS veterans and a British physicist named Dr. Alan Pritchard. formerly of the Telecommunications Research Establishment. His preliminary report described Helios as a rotating plasma apparatus designed to convert electromagnetic fields into radiant propulsion. Before further testing could occur, radio contact with the site abruptly ceased. A subsequent search party dispatched from Prague found no trace of either team, only burned tents and abandoned vehicles. The tunnel entrance had collapsed completely, as if by internal explosion. Officially, the incident was attributed to a methane detonation, yet field photographs recovered from a damaged reconnaissance camera show the valley illuminated by a column of pale light extending vertically into the sky. Local witnesses described it as a star falling in reverse. Within months, all documentation related to Black Meridian was ordered, destroyed under U.S. Department of Defense Directive X-104A, the surviving index card cataloguing the operations. Existence carries a handwritten note. Meridian project absorbed into Greylight Division. 747. No record of Greylight exists in any NATO archive. Rumors about the mission resurfaced in the 1960s when Romanian intelligence discovered references to American retrieval teams operating illegally within their borders during the early Cold War. One captured report from the Securitate in 1965 included an eyewitness testimony from a shepherd who recalled men in grey uniforms digging near the old mine and carrying away metallic crates marked Helios. He described the smell as like thunder before rain. In 1975, a retired CIA analyst, Joseph Winthrop, leaked excerpts of what he claimed were the original Black Meridian field reports to a journalist in Hamburg. His documents included carbon copies of equipment manifests, maps of subterranean layouts, and a chilling transcript of a final radio transmission between Colonel Lansing and headquarters. In the message, Lansing's voice can be heard saying, "We are beneath the threshold. The air hums. The machines are waking." Moments later, static. After the leak, Winthrop was found dead in his Washington apartment from what authorities called a heart attack. His personal papers vanished before investigators arrived. The journalist who received the documents fled to Denmark and later recanted his entire story, insisting he had been misled. Yet photographs of the papers had already circulated within academic circles. Linguistic analysts who examined the pages noted consistent formatting with verified US Army intelligence documents from 1947. Even the Soviet archives reference Black Meridian obliquely. A GRU report from 1948 refers to Western forces recovering ignition core prototypes from the Carpathian sector, followed by a statement that uncontrolled light emissions observed in region were not of natural origin. Soviet officers who entered the mountains months later reportedly found melted rock formations resembling vitrified glass. No physical trace of the Helios apparatus has ever been located. Some researchers believe it was a component of the Reich's rumored Sonnenrad propulsion experiments, attempts to harness magnetic vortices for energy or flight. Others insist it was biological in nature, a form of neural amplification meant to weaponize human consciousness. Both theories remain speculative. The last official reference to Operation Black Meridian appears in a 1953 CIA interdepartmental memo marked "Do Not Cite." The note simply reads, "Meridian assets compromised, all further contact prohibited, residual field effects continue within site perimeter." What those effects were is unknown. For decades afterward, mountaineers in the Maramuresh region reported unusual phenomena: compass needles spinning erratically, static electricity in the soil, and, during storms, faint illumination seeping through fissures in the rock. Locals still call the valley Valea Focului Alb, the Valley of the White Fire. Romanian authorities maintain it remains unsafe due to subsurface instability. If the purpose of Black Meridian was to erase whatever had been discovered there, it succeeded almost entirely. Only fragments survive: scorched photographs, mislabeled equipment reports, and whispers among veterans who claim they saw things no official record would ever confirm. The operations files, once housed at Fort Meade, were reportedly destroyed in the 1953 Langley fire. Yet among the few documents that escaped, a single index card remains. Its contents are sparse. Operation Black Meridian. Status: disavowed. Last message received March 28, 1947. Directive: do not re-enter containment zone under any circumstance. Chapter 5. The Forgotten Men of Camp Eisenlicht. In the final weeks of the Second World War, as the Allies closed in on southern Germany, US reconnaissance aircraft photographed a heavily camouflaged military compound hidden among the forests north of Augsburg. At first, it was mistaken for a standard Wehrmacht logistics site. Only after the 45th Infantry Division entered the area in late April 1945 did the compound's true nature begin to surface. Its gate bore the name Eisenlicht Versorgungslager, Eisenlicht Supply Camp, but the layout was unlike any supply depot the Americans had encountered. Barbed wire surrounded barracks without windows, and high-voltage lines ran into underground bunkers rather than out of them. The soldiers who entered first, led by Captain James R. Mallory of the 157th Regiment, reported an unsettling silence. There was no gunfire, no resistance, only the faint hum of generators somewhere below ground. Mallory's after-action report, filed on May 2, 1945, described rows of identical buildings, each numbered but locked from the outside. When engineers forced the doors open, they found not supplies, but prisoners, hundreds of them. None wore proper insignia. Their uniforms were stripped of rank and unit patches. Some had their tongues removed. Others appeared emaciated yet bore no signs of traditional malnutrition. Every man's uniform carried the same mark, a black spiral painted on the breast pocket. The soldiers were unarmed and compliant, but their eyes, Mallory wrote, did not move in unison with their faces. The compound's administrative offices were in disarray, filled with torn papers and burned ledgers. A single surviving folder, later archived as File 77E, contained personnel rosters for Psychologische Einsatzabteilung Eisenlicht, Psychological Operations Detachment Eisenlicht. The unit's stated function was simulation of Allied maneuvers for experimental counterintelligence. No further explanation was provided. A journal recovered from an adjacent command hut contained unsettling details. References to cognitive field reinforcement, voice imitation through induced resonance, and neurological imprinting of false orders. The author, identified only by initials VK, wrote that the subjects retain commands longer after the throat is silenced. Following the discovery, the camp was cordoned off and investigated by the US Army Counterintelligence Corps. Surviving German staff were interrogated, but their testimonies were incoherent. One interpreter recorded that a guard named Otto Kleeforth claimed Eisenlicht was a listening post, but not for radio. When pressed, he began convulsing and died within minutes of what the attending medic called spontaneous hemorrhaging. His body was buried without autopsy. The physical structure of the camp revealed even deeper mysteries. Beneath Barrack 12, engineers located a tunnel system descending 3 levels into the earth. The walls were lined with copper sheeting and arrays of what appeared to be loudspeakers or directional transmitters. At the lowest level, a central chamber contained a massive steel sphere, suspended by cables and connected to the surface via thick conduits. When powered down, the sphere emitted low-frequency vibrations detectable by seismographs up to 2 kilometers away. Technical specialists speculated that it had been used for testing sonic weaponry, though no Allied scientist could explain the configuration. On May 7, 1945, Colonel Arthur Wade of the 45th Division sent a coded report to SHAF headquarters describing the installation as a classified psychotechnical site of potential intelligence value. Within 24 hours, the message was retracted. The camp was handed over to a specialized US unit known as the T-Force, which immediately evacuated all personnel and sealed the area under armed guard. Local civilians were ordered to relocate. By mid-May, the site had vanished from official maps. In the years following the war, Eisenlicht disappeared from public memory, but fragments of the story persisted. In 1958, a former T-Force translator named George Abrahams confessed to British journalists that he had seen experiments involving induced obedience during his time in Bavaria. His account mentioned men who responded to commands before they were spoken aloud. Abrahams died 2 months later in an apparent car accident. His statements were dismissed as delusional until 1973, when declassified US Army Signal Corps files briefly referenced Field Test E-12, Eisenlicht apparatus, terminated due to instability. Meanwhile, locals who lived near the forest continued to report strange phenomena. Hunters spoke of rhythmic pulses echoing through the ground during storms, and fishermen in the nearby Lech River claimed their radios would suddenly burst into static, followed by Morse sequences, patterns later confirmed by amateur operators to be intentional signals. In 1961, a Bundeswehr survey team sent to map the forest for construction of new telecommunications towers reported instrument failures whenever they approached the old coordinates. Their compasses spun erratically, and tape recorders picked up faint clicking sounds, later identified as Morse for the letter Phi, repeated endlessly. Archival digging in the 1980s by West German historians uncovered references to Versuchsfeld Eisenlicht, Eisenlicht test field, in surviving SS research correspondence. One letter, dated February 1945, mentioned Phase 3, subject integration successful, collective field coherence achieved at 0.7 Tesla. The signature read simply Sturmbannführer VK. Analysts have long speculated that these initials refer to Victor Kalt, an SS officer attached to the Arne Nerber's Department of Experimental Psychology, who disappeared in April 1945. In 1992, a private excavation sponsored by a Munich university attempted to locate the camp's remains using ground-penetrating radar. The survey did indeed reveal rectangular subsurface anomalies consistent with buried concrete foundations. But before further digging could begin, Bundeswehr officials arrived and halted operations, citing environmental protection statutes. The lead researcher, Dr. Heinz Oberfeld, later claimed his team had been warned by an unnamed government liaison that the site remains under NATO jurisdiction. His field notes, seized by authorities, were never returned. Unverified rumors hold that some of the Eisenlicht survivors were secretly transferred to facilities in the United States as part of post-war intelligence operations, much like scientists from Operation Paperclip. A CIA memorandum declassified in 2004 references former Axis personnel with experience in mass suggestion field research being redeployed for interrogation-resistant studies. No names are provided. Today, the region where Camp Eisenlicht once stood is a restricted woodland under Bundeswehr supervision. Signs along the perimeter warn of radioactive hazards despite no record of contamination. At night, locals still report hearing distant clicking noises from within the trees, patterns that, when recorded, translate into shortwave Morse, corresponding to the phrase, "We are ready." Every attempt to reopen the files has met with official silence. The US Army's Historical Division maintains that all documentation pertaining to Eisenlicht was lost during the European theatre consolidation of 1946, yet a 1989 memorandum from the British Ministry of Defence confirms the existence of a sealed file labelled Eisenlicht PSY 1945, stored at Hanslope Park under the highest security classification. Those who have seen the surviving photographs describe endless rows of identical men standing in formation, faces blank, eyes fixed forward, mouths stitched shut. Each bears the black spiral insignia across the chest. The handwritten caption beneath the final image reads, in English, "Subjects awaiting activation." No one knows who took the picture or where the negatives came from. The metadata suggests it was developed not in 1945, but in 1949, 4 years after the camp was supposedly destroyed. And somewhere beneath the forests north of Augsburg, instruments still detect low rhythmic vibrations, like the faint pulse of something buried, still alive, waiting for orders that will never come. History is supposed to rest beneath stone, safely sealed behind the lines of what we call truth. But some stories resist burial. They bleed through the cracks of official silence, hum across forgotten frequencies, and move unseen beneath our certainty. What we've uncovered isn't proof, it's residue, the ash of something once alive and deliberate. Perhaps the past was never defeated, only contained. And if the old mechanisms of deception still hum in the dark, then maybe the war for memory never ended at all. Every archive holds a heartbeat, faint but persistent, reminding us that some secrets were never meant to fade. They wait, not for discovery, but for recognition. Because once you've heard the signal, once the noise begins to form words, you can never pretend the silence is empty again.